I'm Lawrence Francis, host of Interpreting Wine, welcoming you to the California Winemaker special series. Across these 4 episodes, recorded in February and March 2023, we'll be going in depth with 4 producers, each of them a member of the California Wine Export Program. Guests reflect a range of locations, production scales, and philosophies. So another massively up-to-date and in-depth exploration of California wines. Subscribe to be alerted when new series episodes go live. We kick things off today in the company of Marie Jones of Emeritus Vineyards. We hear Marie's origin story before she takes us into the history of Emeritus. We talk new projects and changes over the last 4 years since she took over as president. We go in-depth into the local winemaking community, talk vineyard orientation, soil, geology, and dry farming. Marie shares some in-depth examples on viticulture practices, experimentation in the vineyard, and we close by talking about the Climate Adaptation Certification Project. Enjoy.
All right, so I'm Marie Jones. I'm the president of Emeritus Vineyards in the Rush River Valley of Sonoma County, California. And I came into the wine industry through my father, who has been in the wine industry my whole life. He did have a life before that, but because I wasn't born, it wasn't nearly as important. So I really discovered a love for wine when I was about 12 years old. I went on a trip with my dad to Burgundy, and he was going to buy barrels and work with his coopers, a tradition that, we still carry on today. And we were tasting with some of his friends in some cellars in Burgundy. And I just remember discovering how incredible wine can be, not only in its taste, but in the greater kind of societal implications and history and just what it really means to people. And, being in a cellar and having somebody telling me, this is where soldiers hid in the French Revolution, and seeing bottles that were older than my country and seeing the roots of the vines, in the cellar was just a really profound experience for, little Mari. And it really just turned it opened my eyes to really what wine could be in the world instead of, it's just what my dad does. So that was how I kind of came into loving wine and appreciating wine and the culture and history of it. And I didn't really think that I was going to follow in my dad's footsteps and come work with him and be in the industry. But very quickly after I graduated from university, I was living in the mountains in Colorado. And it pretty quickly became something that I was really interested in, mostly in giving my very helpful advice and opinions to my father. And after a few years of that, he basically said, well, if you're going to tell me everything I need to do, why don't you just come do it? So I moved back home almost 11 years ago now, and started working with him and made some big changes or big projects, I guess. And then about 4 years ago, my dad retired, and I've taken over the reins of the company since then.
Amazing. And I always find it interesting. Yeah, it's a common kind of theme, really. I guess the children trying to kind of move away, trying to do something different. And I'm just curious, you said you were kind of away from home. Was there a sort of a completely different path that you would sort of set out on, totally away from wine?
I'm not sure if there was. I went to university on the East Coast in upstate New York. So very rural, very cold. And when I ended up in Colorado after that, I was really enjoying my youth. I was snowboarding all the time. I was working with this wonderful nonprofit organization there, and I loved what I did and I loved where I lived. But I wasn't exactly sure of kind of what the long-term vision was, if there was one when you're, 23. So I really enjoyed it. And I think, staying in nonprofit work probably would have been a really natural path for me as well. I will say I'm still in nonprofit work for the most part. So it's just a different type. And so I did really like that. I think that was probably would have been a way that I would have, gone in my career. I was really, I grew up spending so much time with my dad at the vineyard and in the winery, but I did go away for high school. I went to a boarding school for high school and then stayed on the East Coast for university. So I did have a lot of time away before coming back. And what really drew me back was the opportunity to build what I thought was something a little bit bigger and better. I just saw a lot of opportunity in what my dad had already created and built, and not just him, but the entire team that he started the company with. And I saw a lot of opportunity for, even more. And that really drew me in.
I love it. Yeah. And you very expertly took us, I guess, up to the door, really, of the company, and I guess the almost the first day. It almost felt like you kind of took us up to that moment of coming in and hinted at some of those changes. So I think maybe combining two things would be a good way to move the story along. I guess firstly is obviously then taking us through those early days and those sorts of changes there. But I think it would also be cool to bring in some of the people that you're working with there. I know that there's a as you already hinted at, there's a well-established high-level team around you. So kind of those things. Your interaction with the team and how things, I guess, have changed over the last 4 years or so since you've been president.
Yeah. So kind of the origin story of Emeritus is this. My dad really was the leader, and he had started a winery called Viticulture in the 70s as a vineyard company, and then a winery in the 80s. And after about, 25, 27 years, the people who gave him money to start that company wanted it back. So they ended up selling the company. But a few days later, Don Hallberg walked into my dad's office and said, "Hey, Bryce, do you still want to buy our apple orchard?" And the answer was yes. And that property is actually where I'm sitting today, Hallberg Ranch. And the new owners of Viticulture didn't want the property, and Bryce just couldn't let it go. Bryce being my father, couldn't let it go. So he basically assembled the team that he had been working with for many years, and kind of everybody jumped ship with him and came over to work here. So there's a number of people that I've known my whole life who I work with, and even more people who have been here since the start of this company. So 24 years ago. And, I look at our vineyard crew, and about half have been with us over 20 years. And then, of course, it's brothers and uncles and cousins who also come work. So it really is a family. Our vineyard manager, Kirk Laka, I've known my whole life. He's worked with my father for over 40 years now. So my dad basically put together this team, hence the name Emeritus, and kind of started, this project for Pinot Noir, which was kind of going to be his crowning jewel of his achievements in wine. So fast forward to it was 2012 when I moved back, and they had established a brand. They had been selling for a number of years, and there was a lot of opportunity in the shifting landscape for direct-to-consumer sales, a tasting room, a wine club, as well as international sales. So that's been a project of mine as well. So I came in as kind of we don't know how to make a tasting room. So Murray, you must know how to, because you told us we needed one. So that was my first big project. Since then, some other things that, Tasting Room Wine Club have been big projects that I spearheaded, but in collaboration with, our winemaker and our vineyard team led by Kirk, we've also added new wines to our lineup. So we make a white Pinot Noir now. We make a number of really small block bottlings as well, very limited production, but, highlighting different areas of the vineyard through kind of noticing that it's special, and then through farming practices and winemaking to really highlight those. So those have been some of my bigger projects. But it is really working with, like you said, a well-established team, a team that is kind of top of their game and some of the most respected in California, to bring, Bryce's vision to life every day.
I love it. Yeah, this is the layers of the story are kind of peeling back, and I think it's great to bring in those people, because whenever just about any winery really that I speak to, I think people always appreciate that it's a team, it's a family, and definitely in your case it's kind of a family affair, and even with those sort of multi generations going on in the vineyard team as well, it sounds really like a very very kind of close knit team. And,
yes.
Would you and again would you maybe orientate us slightly to, I guess, the wider winemaking community? I mean, often when I kind of bring up that as a topic, people will maybe have some examples, or they'll have some stories around actually people kind of pulling together. That's always my sense, is that actually there's obviously competitiveness out in the market, but actually the culture of winemaking communities is actually usually quite collaborative.
Yeah, I think it definitely is. So we have, and I apologize, I have to do a little bit of quick math to get to hectares, but it's about...
That's fine.
Let's see.
Acres is fine.
It's about 140 acres of total vineyard that we have. So that's, like 55, 60 hectares, give or take. And we actually sell our grapes to about 13 wineries, as well as producing wine under our own label. So we're estate grown, but we sell to a lot of, neighbors and friends, and have for, since we started. And I think that even just, I love our Russian River Valley community. I love our Sonoma County community. I love our California community of winemakers and wineries. But there is something also really special about this little community of, people who work with Hallberg Ranch, fruit, that is really special too. So I think that we are an incredibly collaborative community, and the mutual respect and just excitement around the projects that we all take on is really palpable. There is also a generation of about my people around my age in their 30s and early 40s that are coming up, both without, their parents shepherding, and also with their parents. So there's some who are just striking out on their own, and there's some who are following in their family's footsteps. So it's also a really interesting and pretty dynamic community of younger winemakers and principals at wineries that have come together as well. And I feel like there's a really awesome kind of network of us, if I can include myself among them, of, collaboration, friendship, and just mutual support too. It's you always need a friend, somebody to have a glass of wine with. So
yeah, and absolutely, and it came up sort of in a series I did with growers in the Finger Lakes quite recently. I'm just always fascinated by that, because I think you have that continual, as is always happening all around us, that continual kind of passing of the baton. But I don't know, it feels as though in winemaking communities, it always just seems more obvious. Maybe because there's always somebody who's leading and is the kind of the face of the brand, and is kind of is out there and is sort of known to people.
I think what's interesting too is if I look at any panel or group that we assemble from Russian River or Sonoma County, and you look at all the winemakers, or even, not even winemakers, but people on the panel, and you start to realize that everybody there has a common thread of, it's not 6 degrees of separation, it's like 2. It's like, I worked with this person, you worked with this person, or I worked for you, and now I'm a winemaker somewhere else, or we both buy fruit from the same vineyard, or any number of those or multiple of them are true of basically, you could put, 2 people or 50 people from Sonoma County wine community, and the degrees of separation are basically 1 to 2.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I love it. And I'm also, super excited that it is, as you've already said, a Pinot noir project, really, and I'm sure we'll get into more of that when we talk about viticulture and winemaking as well. And really curious to unpick and get behind the different ranges as well, and kind of how all of this shows up in the glass. But I'm a one for setting the scene. So I'm really curious about where you've already started describing there in terms of the Hallberg Ranch, and I just invite you really to do what I say, which is kind of taking the drone up, really, taking it a little kind of high up, and really orientating us to where that is in I guess in sort of a slightly wider California / AVA context, and then obviously then start to bring the drone down a little bit and talk to, I guess, microclimate and the particular nuance of that particular block.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we have 2 vineyards. So in total, we're about an hour and a half, 15-minute drive north of San Francisco. So we're, and a lot of people tend to think of California as being sunny and beautiful. And while it is very beautiful, it's not always sunny. And if you ever visit San Francisco in June, you'll definitely need about, your heavy jacket and many layers, we say. So we actually get very similar patterns of weather to San Francisco with some differences. So our whole region is really defined by fog intrusion from the Pacific Ocean. From where we are, our 2 vineyards are about 10 to 12 kilometers from the Pacific Ocean. So we're a little bit inland, but still get a lot of coastal influence. So the weather patterns that we see as the inland heats up, the cold air is sucked in from the Pacific Ocean, and that's what creates all of our fog, which is pretty much the defining feature of this entire region. How much fog you get, how long it lingers in the morning, what time it blows in. And that makes a lot of really big differences. Even just, our second vineyard, Pinot Hill, is, 8 kilometers away, and it's a vastly different climate because of the way that the fog interacts with the landscape. So bringing the drone down a little bit, where we are at Hallberg Ranch, which is our kind of heart and soul of what we are, and kind of the vineyard that started everything. We're in a subregion of the Russian River Valley called the Green Valley. And so it's a cooler area even of the Russian River Valley, which is already a cool growing area. And so we see the fog come in overnight. The temperatures start to cool down in the afternoon when the wind kicks in, but the actual fog cover doesn't come in until overnight. And this is during the growing season, I should say. So the fog settles in the valley overnight. It's nice rolling hills, really, we call them undulating hills, just very gentle, subtle, but definitely some difference in the fruit grown on different parts of the hillsides. So the fog settles in overnight, and then it doesn't burn off till about 10 or 11 in the morning the next day. And so then the temperature slowly rises throughout the day, and then at about 3 o'clock it starts to drop again when the wind kicks in. So it's kind of these sunny afternoons, but kind of cool ocean breeze every afternoon. And when I say breeze, I mean, it's not really a breeze. It's a strong wind. It'll knock over wine glasses and and lift umbrellas out of their stands. So it's pretty aggressive. But we do get kind of the best of both worlds, and that diurnal shift is really strong because we have that cool fog overnight, but then the sunny afternoon. So, and it still gets quite cold overnight. We don't get like freezing temperatures during the summer, but we would get, and I don't know how to do the Celsius, but it would be like 45 degrees Fahrenheit, which is quite chilly. You're going to want like a really nice coat for those nights. And so then if you go to other areas of the Russian River Valley or Sonoma County, depending on how the fog really interacts with the landscape is a really big defining factor. So the further you move inland, the warmer it gets. The fog doesn't linger as long in the morning. So you have more sun exposure, a little bit higher temperatures. There's also patterns, there's coastal mountain range. So depending on the patterns of the mountain range, it might be easier or harder for the fog to come in and intrude into your region. So where we are at Pinot Hill is in this really nice little break in the mountains. And so that's kind of a fog channel. The fog goes past least distance. So that's like a fog channel where it's really easy for the fog to come in from the ocean. So Pinot Hill is foggy from about 3 p.m. until about noon the next day. So the fog intrusion starts much earlier in the day there, and it lasts much longer in the morning. So at Pinot Hill, we only have a few hours of direct sunlight. But interestingly, the nighttime temperatures are a little bit warmer because you have the breeze, you have the wind, but the daytime temperatures are cooler. So not quite the same diurnal shift, but overall a cooler growing site, and also much steeper. So it's really interesting, just the way that the fog interplays with everything is pretty defining. And then also soils. Sonoma County has more soil types than, anybody wants to learn about. So depending on where you are, even the Rush River Valley has a lot of different soil patterns. So depending on where you are, the combination of the soil and the fog, you're going to have really different growing conditions, even within a small AVA.
Yeah, fascinating. It's obviously, these are all the things that affect those individual sites and lead to so many different decisions. I guess in terms of right back to grape selection, and obviously a kind of a stalwart of the cooler areas, Pinot, and just out of curiosity though, because the wind and fog, I think that's a fascinating kind of interaction, but does it? So it sounds as though both of those sites they have the influence of both. Then so
yes,
they actually they really are maybe some of the coolest sites and sort of
the two we in the Rush River Valley we kind of talk about neighborhoods, like there are different little pockets within the AVA or the appellation that we find have different characteristics. While there's still kind of that theme of the Rush River Valley, there is some differences within it. So we're kind of in the two coolest regions of the Rush River Valley, and so it's the regions that are most affected by that fog and wind, because we're the furthest west. We're the closest to the ocean, so we get inundated first. And then where Hallberg is, because it's in a valley, kind of overall it's in a valley. The vineyard itself is not a valley. The fog pools there, and so it just lingers a little bit longer in the morning than even just 10-minute drive east. I come in to the winery from the east every day, and it's like I go from like very little fog, and then by the time I'm at the winery, it's just like covered in fog. So it's just differences in the region based on how long the fog lingers, how strong the wind can be. The wind can kind of hit everywhere, I will say, but the fog is the bigger one, and then soil, of course. Okay,
yeah. No, this is great because you're absolutely preempting the next question, which is really about soil, as again what's kind of sitting underneath that. But again, the equivalent of taking the drone up is actually jumping in the time machine and going back. So again, I'm curious, again in kind of whatever way, as much detail as you care to. Would you mind just talking to soils, but maybe also bringing in the geological impact as well?
Yeah.
What are the kind of those bigger forces that have shaped that landscape?
Yeah, so where I am sitting right now used to be an inland ocean. So most of Sonoma County really was, and when the plates hit together, formed some mountains and pushed it so that this is now not an ocean, right? So because of that, and because of other things that I have to admit I don't fully understand, there's like more, I believe I have this correct, there are more soil types in Sonoma County than in all of France. And I think people have probably heard that before. So the diversity of soil, of style, of grape varietal is, to me, it's unmatched in California as a whole, and certainly Sonoma County, as a kind of region within that. So there's a lot going on. The Russian River is a small kind of snapshot of that. Mm-hmm. There's about 3 main soil types in Russian River. The one that we are planted on both of our vineyards that have is called Goldridge soil. So it's a really, really fine sandy loam. It's like if you took beach sand and ground it up, it's like that fine. It's almost dust. And then underneath that, we have clay soils at both of our vineyards, different types of clay, but clay soils, clay loams, so kind of sandy clays underneath that Goldridge. Goldridge has been really prized and sought after for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. It's really well draining. Pinot Noir doesn't really want to sit in a bunch of water. So it's very good for that. And also tends to lend a little bit of a lighter, more delicate style to the wine is what we found at our vineyards. So depending on where you're on the hillside, if there's more Goldridge, deeper layer of Goldridge, we find that the wines are a little bit more delicate than when there's less Goldridge and more of the clay influence. So very popular, or very prized soil, very sought after for Pinot Noir. So that's actually one of the reasons why Bryce and Kirk wanted to buy this property, Hallberg Ranch and Pinot Hill, because it had this Goldridge soil. What they didn't realize at the time, which has been really important to the way that we farm, is that underlying that Goldridge is that sandy clay loam. Mm-hmm. And that's just as, if not more important for us in the way that we farm than the Goldridge, but it's really the combination that's magical for us. So yes, there's a lot going on, a lot of different soil types, a lot of different landscapes, hillsides, plains, et cetera, in this region. So all of that has a big impact, obviously, on how you choose to farm and what kind of wines you make.
Yeah, cool. And specifically, is that that clay sitting down there, holding those nutrients and holding that water? Is that where the ability to dry farm then comes in? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So yes, I probably buried the lead. So because of that combination and because of that clay in particular, we're able to dry farm. So we're not using any supplemental irrigation on the vines at all, which is, of course, mandated in much of the world. Mm-hmm. But in California, where we don't get any summer rainfall, you have to, if you're going to farm that way, you have to have a soil that can really retain the winter rainfall for the vines to use in the summer. And so, again, there's so many different soil types. It's just not possible everywhere. Or some places the water table is really shallow. If you're planted, even just a short drive from here, there's Laguna de Santa Rosa. And if you're there and that floods every winter, the roots are going to rot off. So there's a lot of different growing conditions in the region. So where we are, because we have this Goldridge, this really fine sandy loam, and then underlying that sandy clay, that clay retains all of the winter rain, and the Goldridge on top is actually so well draining that we don't see a lot of runoff. It's able to capture most of what rains really quickly because it's so well draining. So that combination is really magical. If it was just clay, if it didn't have that Goldridge, it would be a lot harder to absorb the water so quickly. And it would also dry out more easily in the summer. So that sandy loam on top is both a rain capture and then a preserver to keep that clay from drying out. Because if the clay were to dry out, the roots would really have a hard time to be able to grow into that. So, it's pretty great.
Yeah, exactly. It's as you say, kind of a 1-2 working symbiotically together. And I think this is really what I kind of hinted at earlier, which is where I think it's fascinating really will be fascinating to hear about the viticulture, because I think you're the first sort of 100% Pinot producer that I've spoken to in California, and I think what you spoke about earlier in terms of those different ranges and kind of what you're kind of putting out into the market. I think that would be a fascinating conversation. Would be to kind of kind of map those across really in terms of, where are they coming from? How are they treated? How are those grapes treated in the vineyard? But then also, talking to some of those unique or, special plots that you've already mentioned, which are maybe vinified separately, and how are they treated? When they're growing as well. So just mapping the ranges to the property and to the site.
Absolutely. So we have two vineyards, Hallberg Ranch and Pinot Hill, and we make a number of wines from each vineyard, and again sell a lot of grapes to other fantastic wineries as well. So we have kind of a lot going on. We have, I think, a similar range to many wineries in that we have our Appalachian wine, our Russian River Valley Pinot Noir. It comes from both vineyards, and that's really, kind of our entry, our starting point. Mm-hmm. Our most popular wine is Hallberg Ranch, so it's a snapshot of really the entire vineyard, all 50 or so hectares of it. And we have now 14 clones planted on the property. Previously it was 11. We added in a few more in 2020. So that wine has a lot. It has a little bit of everything in it. So it has a lot going on in terms of layers. It, it has from the hillsides, from the, bottom of the hill, from the top of the hill, from the middle of the hill. It has the entire vineyard. Everything, every single block, every single clone is vinified separately all the way up until it's ready to go into a bottle. So it gives our winemaking team really, maximum options to create, the final, Hallberg Ranch wine, which I think, they'll tell you is the hardest one to put together because it does have so many pieces. It might be, 50 individual lots. And then within that, a 5-ton tank might have, 5 different barrel treatments that the wine goes into. So there's a lot going on. And then from, Hallberg Ranch and then Pinot Hill, kind of its counterpart, snapshot of the whole vineyard. We then have what we call our microclimate wines.
And sorry, just to jump in very quickly, because I just want to get the rough percentages, but I know the total production is about 120,000 bottles. So how does that split between the two main productions before we then go into the
so about a little less than half of that production is of Hallberg Ranch, of that wine. Yeah, so that's why it's our most popular.
Okay.
And that's, in our domestic market in the United States, that's the wine that we sell in wholesale. So that's, if you're traveling in New York or Miami or California, that's the wine that you're going to come across most often. Okay.
And Pinot Hill, slightly less then?
Yeah, Pinot Hill is a much smaller production. It's a much smaller vineyard as well. So that vineyard's only about 10, 12 hectares. And again, we sell a lot of the fruit, so it's a much smaller production. And then we also make these other wines from Pinot Hill, which makes the other production a little bit smaller too. So, so then we have our microclimate wines, we call them. And those are just kind of, I think of them as like a miniature vineyard within the vineyard. So it's highlighting a certain region of the vineyard, a certain little area, a couple blocks, a couple clones that have a special kind of expression of that little place. These aren't tiny vineyards. They're also not, enormous, huge commercial operations, but they're not tiny, especially by Sonoma County standards. They're quite large. And so to kind of zoom in on, a little parcel within that is pretty special. So Pinot Hill, we have two, they're east and west. And so the vineyard, the hill, has an east exposure and a west exposure. And depending on the side, you can actually get very, very different expressions. Most of that has to do with the kind of direct sunlight, the way that the fog interacts with the vines, and then the direct sunlight. The east side basically gets no direct sunlight because of, it's covered in fog all morning. The west side just gets a couple hours in the afternoon. So the alcohol difference too, you could go from 12% to 14%. From the east to the west side. So the grapes just ripen very differently. So to be able to highlight each of those sections of the vineyard separately is pretty wonderful and very fun to taste side by side. And at Hallberg, kind of the mirror of that would be what we call our Wesley's Reserved. It's named after my grandfather. And there's just these few blocks in the center of the vineyard. It's a couple different clones, and they're just richer, more textural. It's like the whole blackberry bush instead of just the blackberry. It's got just, a little bit more of that kind of savory and rustic kind of feel to it. So that becomes its own wine as well. And then to get even smaller, we zoom in on single block, single clone. And so we have 5 of those total, 2 from Pinot Hill and 3 from Hallberg. We have a couple of special field selections that our vineyard manager, Kirk, brought back with him from Burgundy in the 90s and has been growing since. They're named Cruz after Kirk. His name is Don Cruz. So Cruz Especial, and then Elite is the other one. And so we bottle both of those clones and blocks separately from Pinot Hill. One is on the east side, one is on the west side as well. And the difference is both in where they're grown, and the clone just really exemplifies what they're about. And then kind of at Hallberg Ranch, the partner ones would be, we have Don's block, named in honor of our first winemaker, Don Blackburn, which is all clone 115. It's from the coolest and deepest Gold Ridge area of the vineyard. So very light, very delicate style of wine, which Don really loved and prized. We have Hallberg Ranch Elite, which is the same Elite clone or Elite selection. And that's kind of grown on the middle of the hill, one of our middle of the hillsides, and very interesting and exotic flavors and aromas in that wine. Very interesting. And then La Combat, which is clone 37, which is also called Mount Eden or the Mary Edwards clone. So really textural, really fat, like it feels fat in your mouth, and from kind of the top of the hill. And so when we're looking at those wines and those blocks that we're going to make, those wines from, we put our attention first into those. And so like La Combat, that clone 37, half of that block we actually thin to 1 cluster per shoot. We've experimented a lot over the years of, do we like 1 cluster per shoot or 2 clusters per shoot? And in reality, we like 1 cluster per shoot and 2 clusters per shoot, but put together. Because with 1 cluster per shoot, you get bigger berries, so you lose a little bit of the intensity, but you lose some of that concentration, but you do get a little bit more intensity. And with 2 clusters per shoot, you lose a little bit of that intensity, but you have a little bit more of the concentration. So we thought for a long time, well, with just 1 cluster per shoot, that's what we really want to make this wine. And in reality, we kind of need both to make it the best expression from that. So there's a lot of that kind of experimentation, I will say our entire vineyard is farmed with a lot of attention to detail, but those blocks are where we put our energy first and prioritize to make sure that we're thinning at the moment that we want to thin them. They're always a priority for picking, the moment that we want to pick them. They're always shoot to the top of the list. So, and then of course, we do have a full-time year-round team. So it's not like any of the vineyard gets neglected, but yeah.
I love it. Yeah, it's it really, processing all of this in the moment. I love it how you've focused in on the people and the grapes. Really, I love the way you've got into the detail about the care and attention. That each block and eventually kind of each range can deliver. So I guess that's going to be really interesting for anyone who's interested in trying the wines or knows the wines already, can kind of almost, can reverse engineer a little bit the story of, why a particular wine, is vinified separately and is bottled separately. And I think really, as we, the time has sort of run away a little bit. But as we sort of look to closing, one thing that you did mention before we turn on the mic, which, I think is fascinating, I think actually perfectly complements what you said there, was mentioning that Pinot Hill Vineyard, becoming one of the 19 vineyards selected by the Sonoma County Wine Grape Commission for a new climate adaptation certification project. And I think that would be a fascinating way to kind of bring all of what you've spoken about together. So could you, take us inside?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so Pinot Hill was it was part of the beta testing for the climate adaptation program, which is now rolled out, and they're still finalizing a couple details, but it's now implemented at a lot more vineyards, including Hallberg Ranch. So the idea behind it was basically, how can we sequester as much carbon as possible in our vineyard? And how do we measure that as meaningful compared to past uses of the land and kind of the original use of the land? So, around here it was basically all forest. So, how do we compare it to what the land's been used for the last 100 years, 150 years, 200, 300 years, and then of course before that? And how can we meaningfully impact our landscape in terms of carbon sequestration, looking at a bigger historical context? And then of course your farming activities. So you're running a tractor, you're compacting soil, you're emitting carbon with your diesel, you're emitting carbon from the soil. How can we quantify that and really ensure that we're doing the best that we can to make a real, hopefully a meaningful impact on the climate? So the program, we were one of the 19 kind of founders or, originals of it. And it was really intensive and really also, I have to say, awesome to be able to look at all of your practices and, even just what's planted around your vineyard. Not 100% of your land is planted to vines, right? So what else is around there? And how can we think about carbon sequestration in everything that we do? So there were a lot of things that we were already doing that is kind of like the highest and best for carbon sequestration. At Pinot Hill, for example, we weren't tilling or disking the rows at all. We had a lot of big trees that were, planted around the vineyard already. Previous to us taking the property, it was pasture land, so we're sequestering more carbon because grapevines sequester more carbon than grass. But we planted a lot of manzanitas, which are indigenous, plant here that sequester a lot of carbon. So things like that. And so what we found is at Pinot Hill, we're able to currently sequester, I want to say it's about 5 metric tons of carbon a year more than what we emit. So we're negative carbon there. And now at Hallberg Ranch, by the end of this year, we'll be over 30 tons sequestered over what we emit. So we've had a little bit, we're experimenting with some no-tilling here at Hallberg. That is a little bit more challenging here because that's the best way that we have to control gophers. And that's honestly just a safety hazard for our team more than anything. So tilling is the best way that we can control the gopher population. And but we're moving to no-till in some other areas that we don't see as high of a risk for gophers. So hopefully that'll go well. We've planted over 100 manzanita plants here, and sticky monkey brush, I think is the name, another indigenous carbon, capture. So by the end of this year, we'll be able to say that we're capturing about 30 more tons of carbon at Hallberg Ranch than we're emitting. So through farming. So it's a pretty great program, and I think a really meaningful step towards sustainability. And, there's a whole lot of options of biodynamic and organic and sustainable certified and all those things. And, I think every farmer basically just wants to do the best they can for themselves, for their families, for their land. And we're certainly no different. And to be able to put something, quantifiable behind it of carbon sequestration, which, is a really important thing that we all kind of need to probably look at, is really, I think, a great next step for our sustainability goals and mission.
A huge thanks to today's guest, Marie Jones of Emeritus Vineyards. Please visit emeritusvineyards.com, where you can learn more about the project and find their main social media handles. Please do help to amplify this episode and the California Winemaker series by sharing the direct link, which is interpretingwine.com/512. You can, as ever, find links to all 4 series episodes in the description below. And of course, I'd love to have you following along with me on social media, where I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, and at Wine Podcast on Twitter. Next time on the Interpreting Wine California Winemaker series in episode 513, I'll be speaking with Will Costello, MS, of Bien Nacido and Solomon Hills Estate. Make sure you're subscribed to be alerted when the episode goes live. See you then.